Welcome to our conversations on artificial intelligence with thought leaders in Africa. My name is Zenzele Ndlovu. I am the head of research at Machine Learning Africa. Our aim is to demystify artificial intelligence, ensuring that AI is not just a buzzword, but that artificial intelligence is fully understood by all the participants in the economy, its benefit and consideration.
Welcome once again to our weekly recordings where Zenzele and I speak to people who work in the field of artificial intelligence and related technologies. Our focus is to speak with people who work in the South African and African market. And I'm very excited about the guest we have today. Zenzele, just before we introduce Jay, what I'd love to just quickly sneak in here is the following. I often speak to academics in this field, and as a practitioner working with corporates, I sometimes feel that they're very disconnected. But then I look at practitioners, and we so desperately need the work and the research of academics. And our guest today is somebody with both feet in both worlds, and so very excited to hear what Jay has to say. But Zenzele, I think let me hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Johan. Today we are very privileged to be hosting Dr. Jay van Zyl, the computational social scientist and technologist. Jay is the founder of ecosystem.AI with headquarters in Menlo Park, California, USA. He's an adjunct faculty member at Henley Business School and at Gibbs. He holds a PhD in engineering. Jay, welcome to our conversation today.
Glad to be here. Nice having me. Thank you.
Awesome. Jay, thank you so much once again. We're very pleased to be hosting you. My first question to you is maybe if you can tell us more about ecosystem.AI, what you do, and of course you both an academic and a professional. Maybe if you can tell us more about what you do and what ecosystem.ai does.
Yeah, maybe the way to explain it is that we kind of see the world as a duality. On the one end, you have technological inventions, and you've got all the, characteristics that you normally would have in technologies, being pushed into the human space, and that kind of takes us into the second realm of human behavior and the fact that this human somewhere in this global system has to function and needs to survive based on its means of surviving. So for me, how it started was that I come out of a math engineering background and woke up one day realizing, oh dear, this human is not behaving the way that it should. It's not doing the things it's supposed to. It says one thing and does another. It's completely confusing in the fact that it's just an entirely different kind of way that you need to solve problems around what this is all about. So for us, the key kind of transcending point was when in my kind of previous business, we focused heavily on how companies innovated and how they drove communication, and we did matchmaking algorithms inside companies, right? Basically taking employees and get them to work better, in settings of pushing innovation and related activities, and that means that you have human behavioral algorithms to do matchmaking. Yeah. And what we realized was that that same concept can be used in markets. So ecosystem AI was essentially born out of how do you create a series of behavioral algorithms that can drive engagement, and especially in the world of wellness, and getting the customers to participate in ways without having to deal with anything that's indoctrinated or propaganda based. Yeah. So how do you build prediction platforms to do that? So ecosystem as the word essentially means that we are a collective of open source technologies, and we have constructed a workbench that wraps all of that. We've got about 18 core technologies in our base stack, and then we've got a worker architecture that supports it, and we've got a real-time scoring engine that is known as the client pulse responder that gets bolted into payment switches or into web interfaces or into anything that requires a real-time predictor to give a response in 3 milliseconds or so. So it's designed to be a high-speed prediction engine. So they're the two components to it.
Mm. Jay, I'm so interested in what you're saying, because I think a lot of times technical people build these platforms and there's very little consideration for the human being. And I often say that I don't think human nature will fundamentally change as AI and these kind of technologies change. We're still the way we are. And I think I've seen on your company's LinkedIn page that, if I'm correct, you employ psychologists, sociologists, or people working in those kind of fields. What I want to ask you is maybe some practical examples or industries or use cases where this technology is working, and what the benefits are when organizations utilize your platforms.
Yeah, listen, that's a great question, because I think that the thing that we sometimes forget is that in the world of data science, most of what you're working on is scientifically oriented. So that means that if you define a hypothesis to as an example, predict churn, that is kind of a common case that we often talk to clients about. The data science team often gets into this conversation with the business people to say, yes, we can predict why and how people leave the company. And what they do is that they typically will use the process where they take historical data, look at some labeled data sets, and they'll be able to build supervised or unsupervised, mostly supervised, build a model to show, yes, there's a binomial indicator that's going to tell you that somebody is very likely to churn. So what we're saying to clients is that, what's the point of predicting that they're going to churn? Because the purpose of predicting churn is to retain. The purpose of predicting churn is not to tell you that somebody's going to leave you. That means that you want to design an intervention. So now the question is, if you want to design an intervention, what should the intervention be based on the personality of why the person got to the point where the rapture point is being already, you already got to the rapture point and they decided to leave. What are you going to do that's going to get them to go back to trusting you, to engaging with you, to buying your services, and to continue to work with you? And that means that it changes the conversation almost entirely. And that means that you can't now just solve the problem using a mathematical construct anymore. It's not about historical data now. Now it is about, what can I do this very second, this very moment, in me engaging with you as an organization to gain your trust, a tiny step at a time, to continue to buy from me or to do the things with me that you used to do with me economically. So that means that to shape that story means that you firstly have to do the science. I'm not saying you don't have to, kind of look at historical data and work out what common behaviors would be. But as soon as you intervene with somebody and I make a recommendation to you and I say to you, here is a gift voucher. As long as you stay with us, you can cash in 10 rand, let's say, or 20 rand over the next week, but you have to stay with me for a month. So as soon as you do that, it means that I have no data to tell me what you're going to be doing next. Because the intervention is a new intervention, it's a new moment in time. That means that the only understanding that I have about you essentially then is the fact that you are a human, the fact that you behave in a certain way in the context of the service that I provide or the product that I provide. And I can then extract from that a set of personality profiles, or what we normally use, we use a social constructivist view to understand that society. And then from there, build the predictor to then deal with reinforcement learning and using a genetic style algorithm to then in real time adjust its behavior, collecting data about people that you need to collect data about as you intervene with it. So that means that the data science process and the software engineering underneath it that is needed, and the data engineering piece of it and the deployment piece of it, all require a different way of thinking about how you solve the problem. It is not as simple as just following a classical linear process anymore. So what we've done with clients fairly successfully in South Africa, and we've got a couple of big clients who have implemented this, is that once you have a base platform, that you know that you can train a model on historical data and drop it into a real-time scoring engine that is, say, bolted into your, let's take an outbound dialer on a call center, or it's on an app that somebody's going to engage in. The moment that you engage with them, the first thing you want to know is their personality. So you want to know if this person is, let's take an example, say an intentional versus an experiential person. If they are intentional, it means that if you've never spoken to them before, you could have made some kind of almost an assumption about what they're going to do with you. And we call that the cold start algorithm. The cold start algorithm says, I need to test something about you. And an intentional person will go straight to the point, want to know the facts, take an action and leave. The person who is more experiential want to say, well, how does it work? Please explain to me the options. Tell me how it's going to work. And that means that you can start shaping how you engage with them without knowing much about them and altering the conversation in real time. And you can guide the technology interface to tell you which way to go. And while that happens, you collect data the whole time. How long did it take for them to respond? How many times did they respond? What kind of cue did they respond to? What was the option that they accepted? And then you use that in an input into designing what is known as progressive exposure. That's called systematic desensitization, where you can take them on a journey with algorithms that you feed in to make sure that you service them 100% based on what they need. So that means that the entire construct is something that you would have to kind of rethink, because it's not just, I'm going to do a trainer and I'm going to get a binomial or a multinomial. It's not just a multi-class classifier to tell you, oh, check, I need to either phone this person, email them, or give them some message on an app. It's now about, in real time, what are the cues that I'm picking up that I can act on based on a behavioral model. And that behavioral model has got an entirely different process that you follow to build, and we can maybe talk about it later. But that's kind of the concept.
I agree with you, Jay. I think it's very important for organizations even to predict the behavior of their consumers, given the innovative and the competitive landscape that we're seeing, that is ever changing. Surely for organizations to survive, even they need to know how their consumers behave, how they will behave next. My question, Jay, will be on the South African companies' responsiveness to the smart technologies. Of course, you operate in different markets in the USA as well as locally here. How would you describe the responsiveness of the South African companies vis-a-vis the US and other established markets?
So I've been really, really fortunate, and I think it's been something that's been incredible for us to work with some really great people in the companies that we've been dealing with locally. And some of the recent successes, and like a specific success in launching new products to market where and you can measure in real time what the uplift is, and you'll be able to run A/B tests throughout the day and see how that rolls out, is something that's been, I think, received incredibly well in the local market. I do see that there are kind of, three pillars of people. I see that on the one end, what happens inside the large institution, as you know, is that you got governance and compliance, and you got decision-making criteria, and you got, so many obstacles that can stop you from getting ahead, that there are this one group of companies who basically have, at the highest levels in the organization, decision-making power, and they can take a decision and they can get it implemented within, a very short space of time. So what we found is that, one of the key focus areas for us is to take, a predictor from the point when you've got your hypothesis and you want to test it in production to having it deployed. You want to take it from 30 days to an hour. I mean, that is kind of our ultimate benchmark, is that once your model is defined, you've done your standalone and offline tests, you're happy with the initial response and you want to get it to market, that productionization should take nothing more than a few hours. And that means that you need a technology to do that. And having that entire ecosystem automated, some companies just get it. They understand it and they want to do it. They have it implemented. They have the team prepared to do that, and they are deeply excited about it. Then you get on the opposite end, this kind of third pillar, that look at all of this and go, well, it is too big a mountain to climb. It is too far a journey to take. It is just too many noise in here. And by the way, AI is not going to help me at all. I'll deal with people one-on-one, and I'm going to talk to them, and we're not going to have anything that is intelligently enabled. And maybe there are some people who, kind of do it rightly, but we definitely see that there are a number of those that are still, very much, they're very skeptical, because they kind of follow, more what's in depressed than what their own convictions are about what's possible once you build something predictive. And then I see that the middle ground is an interesting one for us, because those are the people who really know that they have to act on something. They know that they have to take, some case forward. They've taken the leap to employ a few data scientists. They put them, they might have a model or two in production. They're not really seeing the uplift because they followed a classical decision-making and data science process. They've got, if you look at like the classical first thing that you have to build is a binomial, take a bunch of data, create a response column, build a model, tap it onto one of your processes, run it in batch daily, and then trying to figure out who's going to have to take an action if it says, well, phone this person today or they're not going to buy, that kind of action. And we see that a lot of people are playing there. In actual fact, the bulk of companies we talk to play in this space. They don't realize that when you get into an area where having 10, 15, 20 models in production that compete with each other, and to get the ones that compete with each other through, it doesn't matter what kind of sampling or explore, exploit algorithm you want to use to be able to test it continuously. And the ones who want to tweak it in real time and get real-time responses, take those responses and act on them immediately. There are a small group of people who really believe that. And I think that, listen, we're truly fortunate that we work with companies in this first place. And we're having conversations with the others, but we've got clients who are really dedicated. So that is very exciting. And I can tell you that, what often happens in like the US market or European markets, people are so scared of regulation and of, how, especially in the context of, making a recommendation to somebody that is going to have something to do with their, kind of financial output, or if you're going to, have discrimination, because we're all trying to avoid that, like we all agree that we're not going to build algorithms that are deliberately discriminative. How do you solve that problem in the context of a regulation and in the context of the data that you have access to? Because if your data is filled and flawed, how are you going to then construct an output? So we're seeing that having some kind of real-time predictor that can collect data based on what the world is really all about without any historical data is also an option that we find some companies here are working on, that we find in some parts of the world they are not even that interested in. So that does create a different kind of excitement, because I think people here are acutely aware that you need to help the people who need more help. It is something that is like it's almost like a collective sense of understanding. Where in some parts of the US, you don't necessarily get that. You get, well, it's exploitation, maximum revenue only. I don't care what the outcome is, just make sure I cover this. So I think that definitely changes the kind of way in which people think about how they solve a lot of these problems in the Southern African context. Yeah.
There's so much to cover, and our time is almost up. But I think, Zenzele, we're going to have to come back to Jay very soon, or at some stage. Maybe as a last question, and when I saw this in your LinkedIn profile, it really interested me. It says there that you do work within the so-called Innovation for Jobs community at Silicon Valley as part of the Stanford Research Institute. I'm very intrigued with what that means. So if you could maybe, if we can end off, Jay, with you telling us a bit more about that.
Yeah, glad to. I'm working with Dr. David Notfors, who is basically the community lead for Innovation for Jobs. That is basically a funded community by a number of individual high net worths in San Francisco region. And the primary focus for us is to try and understand how the gig working economy is affecting human lives all around. And if you think of, how jobs typically got created, in kind of a original historical sense, if you had to think of, thousands of years, maybe 700-800 years and prior, it was highly localized. It was very entrepreneurial. It was essentially the fact that you had a family business with a small unit. And then with the advent of the corporation, you had this very, very large institutions that provided a way in which you can organize large groups of people. And it is typically what we've seen, a less safe option for most people who want to go and construct some kind of future in a volatile world. Because what happens in the larger institution, there's this false sense of security that often gets created as people, work in certain functions. So what we've seen, what basically happened with, and if you think about it, as the global communication networks got rolled out, and we removed time from the information dissemination cycle, meaning that our ability to communicate and have access to intellect essentially is now devoid of location. So it doesn't matter if I live in Cape Town or San Francisco or Moscow or Soweto, I get exactly the same access. I see the same thing that you see. I see the same pattern. I have access to the same software. There's absolutely zero obstacle that should stop me other than having access to electricity and network connectivity. And you can compete on any global scale. So that means that this innovation for jobs, we try to understand these clusters of behaviors of companies that are emerging and the prediction patterns that can be applied in figuring out how you would matchmake the best person with the best skill to the best outcome. I mean, one of the things we worked on recently is a concept called the cool ability. And if you think about it classically, and I'm sure you've been through, an employment cycle, either being employed or having people that you've employed. And people employ people that have got a clean CV with as many items as possible. They can speak well, they can represent themselves well, they can do all those things that you will never need them for in a job. So why do that in the first place? Why not just go to, if you want to employ somebody technical, why don't you just go to 99 Designs or Upwork or, Logo Tournament or some community? You could say, well, show me what you've done previously. How long did it take you to do it? What did it cost you? And I'll employ you entirely on that. You don't have to say a word to me. I don't have to know what you look like. I don't have to understand what you're all about. You don't even have to sit at a desk. I don't care what your clothes are. And yet those are the things that classically people used to be employed for. So that means that the cool abilities movement is saying that if I've got really cool capabilities, I should be able to get employed entirely just on that. And if you think about it in the modern world, one of the biggest areas of discrimination, firstly, is age. Because if you're too old or too young, nobody wants you. The next thing is that if you speak funny, if you have an accent in some countries, they think, oh no, this person don't understand because they can't speak properly. Then think about, the location where you're from, the city that you're from, wherever that geographical location is a high part of, or a big part of how people will see you. Or then think about the university that you went to, or maybe the gender, the male or the female option, and the race option, and all of those are discriminatory properties that in the new gig world, in this innovation for jobs, we attempt to figure out how you will remove those over time, so that you are basically employed for the true capabilities that you have. So I don't care if you live in whatever town somewhere or whatever geographical location or whatever you have, but if you can show me you can do that job, because I need to have the following capabilities in my business, I'll employ you for capability and not for all of these other bits. So I'm the co-chair of analytics with David to figure out what kind of data sets and how we see the network graphs of how all of these companies hang together, who are constructing those, who are building the momentum behind this entirely new way of thinking about the concept of work in general. Yeah. So that's just maybe a glimpse of what that's about.
Jay, thank you so much for spending time with us and chatting with us about this very important subject and telling us about what you do. I mean, the wonderful work that you're doing. Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I'm really glad you guys let me on your show. Good to catch up with you again.